I can see it now. Captain Ginyu, protector of the weak and the helpless and the good. Look, don't try to reform me. Just show me your perfect power. You betcha! Still rising? No way! No way! What? 100,000? Ay, ay, ay! I didn't count on this! This is insane! 110,000? It's still going up! Hey! Stop! Cut it out! This just isn't my game! I had you in my hands! I should have destroyed you while I had the chance!
With all due respect, Captain, this might be a good time to go and get Frieza!
Shut up, Jace! I can handle this!
Man, oh man! Now I see what Berto and I were really up against! We didn't have a clue! Fighting power 117,000! Oh no! That's only 3,000 away from Captain Genyu's maximum!
What? Darn! No way! Hey! Stop that! A wise guy, huh? Let's see here. What, 140,000? No! It can't be!
I think your friend's having a nervous breakdown!
He's just cooling off, mate. He'll be back. 150,000! Unreal!
Chase! Look out! Here! Try these on for size!
Watch it! Captain, I think it'd be wise if we let them drop Frieza!
Shut up, Chase! I'm in charge here! Astonishing! Incredible!
Man, we should be getting the heck out of here right now. Yeah, I've seen about all I want to see.
There's no need to be scared of me. Just say you're sorry for what you've done and leave, and no harm will come to you.
What? Apologize?
That's right.
We're the Ginyu Force. We do as we please.
I'm sorry to hear that.
You know. What are you bringing? Whew, that hurt.
You sure you
That's still recharging. I can't cast that yet. I need to target something first. It's locked. stealing. It's been fun. Till we meet again. Farewell. Get close. I need a memento. It's still charging.
Speak, friend. May your blades...
お前の相手は私だ。破壊のエネルギーなんかに負けてたまるか。ここで負けるわけにはいかん。そのために余計なものは全て捨てた。いかん、避けろベジータ。第七宇宙滅びよう。破壊しきれんほどの技を食らわせてやる。突破。
It's Boyo time at Boyo Tropical. Right now, get dinner for just $5.99. Enjoy half a chicken with rice.
Vegeta sure has changed a lot in Dragon Ball Super, yet he's still glanced over by many of his enemies throughout the series. To highlight these instances, and to give Vegeta some well-deserved showtime, we're gonna look back at some of the moments where he was heavily underestimated. We are only gonna include scenes from the anime and manga, not stories from games or movies, so, fair warning, there will be some spoilers ahead. Before we begin, subscribe to CBR and ring that bell to join the
お前の相手は私だ。
破壊のエネルギーなんかに負けてたまるか。ここで負けるわけにはいかん。
そのために余計なものは全て捨てた。
いかん、よけろベジータ。
第七宇宙滅びよう。
破壊しきれんほどの技を食らわせてやる。突破。
Vegeta sure has changed a lot in Dragon Ball Super, yet he's still glanced over by many of his enemies throughout the series. To highlight these instances, and to give Vegeta some well-deserved showtime, we're gonna look back at some of the moments where he was heavily underestimated. We are only gonna include scenes from the anime and manga, not stories from games or movies, so, fair warning, there will be some
お前の相手は We've tried to warn you, and yet here you are. I guess you always will be a naive idiot. Thanks for the offer, but I can't. As annoying as this bastard can be, it's our rivalry that keeps pushing me to get stronger. I can't afford to kill him.
What if I sweeten the deal? Take Goku's life and I'll appoint you the Supreme Commander of the entire Frieza Force. Of course, I know at the moment it only consists of sorbet, but we'll rebuild it stronger than ever.
You would make me your Supreme Commander. Is that a real offer?
Should I take that as a yes?
Damn it. Now I may actually regret this. Use your head. Do you actually think I would stay loyal to you after you blew up the planet I was destined to rule?
Well, I wonder what the prince would do if he knew you authorized Planet Vegeta's destruction from the start.
Shh, keep that under wraps. Get down here, Krillin. Your buddy Kakarot needs a sensu bean. He's fading fast.
Okay, I'm coming.
No, I don't think so! What
He wasn't kidding. You're in bad shape. Good thing that space cop didn't want his. Thanks, Vegeta! You really saved my neck!
You can thank me by staying out of this fight from now on. I'm finishing this.
Yeah, of course! It's your turn anyway. Have fun!
Please, if you believe you can defeat me, then you're more delusional than ever!
That's right. You had no idea, did you? I've been a Super Saiyan for years, and now I too have the power of a god. You of all people should know this about me, that I don't share Kakarot's taste for forgiveness. I'm sending you back to hell.
No, this can't be real! This is not the way this ends!
At least try to face your death with some honor. And don't dream of resurrecting again.
More delusional than ever!
right. You had no idea, did you? I've been a Super Saiyan for years, and now I too have the power of a god. You of all people should know this about me, that I don't share Kakarot's taste for forgiveness. I'm sending you back to hell.
The defeat at the Battle of Callinicus was the first the Romans suffered during the conquest of Greece, but they were ever tenacious, and the Macedonian Wars would continue. King Perseus was willing to drive the invaders out, while the Roman Republic sent another commander to the area. The fate of Greece was decided at the Battle of Pydna. This video is sponsored by Filmora 9. Filmora 9 is a powerful and easy to use video editing program. It offers the best-in-class complexity, allowing users to work in 100 video tracks, apply transitions, motion elements, filters, and hundreds of effects to create beautiful videos. Even beginners will find Filmora 9 easy and quick to use, as it's very intuitive and empowers the user to apply complex video editing techniques like green screen, stabilization, color correction, speed controls, and professional 3D LUTs with a single click. Its audio editing tools are also very good and makes noise removal simple. If you're a content creator or planning to be one, Filmora 9 is perfect for you, as it allows the creation of videos in multiple formats for any social network out there. It's also free to try and cheaper than the alternatives. Support our channel and discover the power of storytelling with Filmora 9 by downloading this extremely powerful video editor via the links in the description. By the end of 169, Rome's position in Greece appeared precarious, and only the arrival of the new consul, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, in 168 BC, breathed fresh life into the floundering Roman cause in Greece. The force which Aemilius took command of was large. 2 especially strengthened Roman and allied legions recruited from the Etruscans and Samnites totaled around 22,000 legionary heavy infantry. Supporting the heavy troops were thousands more light infantry, including Velites and men from Pergamon and the city-state allies. 4,000 cavalry also mounted up in the Roman army, including 1,000 of the infamous Numidian cavalry under their prince Miscegenes. With the North African troops also came 22 imposing war elephants. Perseus meanwhile had around 44,000 foot and 4,000 horse. 21,000 of the infantry comprised the fearsome phalangists with their sarissa pikes and phalanx formation, which reached a mile in length. Supporting this moving wall of pikes were light troops, auxiliaries such as the Thracian javelinmen and Illyrian archers. After advancing into Thessaly in the summer of 168, Amilius marched south, meeting Perseus at the foot of Mount Olympus, where he had drawn up his army in a highly defensible position. The Antigonids were dug in on the west bank of the Elpius River, just east of the mountain, and had easy access to the nearby town of Dium. With typical Roman grit, it seems like the fact that Perseus had such a good position did not bother the legionaries, and, eager to redeem their honour after Callinicus, urged Amilius to attack immediately. As a retort, Amilius told his men to mind their place, and underlined the fact that they would fight when and how he told them to. In order to dislodge Perseus from his defensive position, Amilius assigned a subordinate, Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica, to launch a feint towards the sea with 3,500 allied infantry and 5,000 legionaries. Under the cover of darkness, he would march through an unguarded pass in order to surprise Perseus. This might have gotten the jump on Macedon's king, but a Cretan auxiliary in the Roman army defected and informed his fellow Greeks of the Roman plan. Reacting immediately to this alarming news, Perseus sent a general named Milo with 2,000 Macedonians and 10,000 Thracian mercenaries to oppose the Roman passage. Though Nasica hadn't expected this resistance, upon his arrival in the pass he ordered a charge. The mountain fighting in narrow defiles and passages was bloody and brutal, and Nasica himself supposedly came toe-to-toe with a fearsome Thracian soldier, slaying him with a pilum javelin. Rome's legionnaires doggedly stabbed and slashed their way through the mountain pass, routing the Macedonians, who then fled back to the main army and informed Perseus of the defeat. Realizing that the loss of this mountain would render his position vulnerable, the king immediately decamped and marched away from the mountain. While Amilius moved through the mountain pass and emerged onto the foothills around Mount Olocrus, Perseus drew up his army behind a river on the plain below, near the town of Pydna. The hand-picked field of battle was fantastic for the Macedonian phalanx, and Perseus's position atop a small ridge and behind the river gave him a distinct advantage. Amilius knew this, and so did not advance just yet, remaining in his camp on the hills. The general's officers, especially Nasica, quickly became restless and wanted to attack immediately. Stoically, Amilius smiled and advised Nasica not to be so hasty, informing him of the folly of attacking a phalanx on such ground. The Romans did not waste their time and constructed a marching camp for that night. When darkness had fallen and the soldiers were resting around the various campfires and sleeping in their tents, the moon suddenly grew dark, its white colour shifting to a dull red. The superstitious men in the Macedonian camp were deeply affected and surprised by what was apparently a bad omen. A moon which seemed to bleed red. Had Zeus abandoned them? At the same time, the equally pious Romans did not react as badly. Why was this? A military tribune of the Roman army, Caius Sulpicius Gallus, was a learned astronomer. The day before, he approached his general and gained his permission to assemble the soldiers, informing them that such an event, that we know as a solar eclipse, would occur on the following night. He urged the soldiers not to see such a thing as an ill omen, as it was a regular, predictable and natural thing. Therefore, when the eclipse did occur, the Roman soldiers simply followed their commander in offering sacrifices to the Greek gods, promising to hold games in Heracles' honour. The gestures worked, and the Roman soldiers' morale was unaffected.
It's Boyo time at Boyo Tropical. Right now, get dinner for just $5.99. Enjoy half a chicken with rice and beans for $5.99 for dinner every day.
$5.99 for half a chicken. That's an awesome deal.
Boyo Tropical.
With both leaders engaging one another in a dangerous staring contest, it would take a spark for the flames to ignite. Said spark came in the form of a misbehaving mule. In order to fill up jugs of water for the thirsty Roman soldiers who wore heavy armour, a small train of mules was led down to a stream below the foothills by lighter troops. Like the stubborn creatures they are, one of the parched pack animals supposedly scented the water and bolted away from its handlers. The water gatherers ran after it and discovered that a group of Perseus's Thracian troops were doing the same. Moreover, the enemy was attempting to steal their mule. The irritated, frustrated and scorching Roman soldiers were not going to give up that mule, and a brawl broke out over the animal. Runners on both sides went to get help, while the mule probably just ran off. Perseus saw an opportunity to draw the Romans down from the uneven foothills of Mount Olocrus, and marched his entire army out of the camp and straight towards the brawl at the stream. The Romans could see what was going on from their camp, and they were furious, demanding angrily to be allowed to march out and fight. Aemilius risked mutiny if he refused, and so gave the signal to form up. After only allowing his legions a brief amount of time to form up, he swiftly commanded the advance, aiming to save the men at the stream. At that moment, the marching phalangists were given the order to lower their pikes. In unison, the first 5 ranks held their sarissæ horizontally, and the ranks behind them kept them at a 45-degree angle. Then they advanced. Against the barely armoured Roman light troops, whose main job was to skirmish at a distance, the phalangists met almost no serious resistance and simply tore through the enemy ranks. Valiantly trying to buy the Romans more time, an auxiliary tribal leader named Salvius obtained his unit's standard and threw it into the phalanx. This galvanized the pressured soldiers, and they furiously tried to get it back. This resulted in massive casualties, but slowed the advance of the phalanx and allowed some men to escape. Aemilius's main force was now closing in, and the swarm of Velites and other skirmishers threw their missiles at the phalanx, mostly to no effect. The legionary heavy infantry, having witnessed the slaughter of their more lightly armoured comrades, became frightened and began to slow down. They saw the sheer size of the steamroller that approached them, and their morale started to wane. Aemilius had to act right now, otherwise his short sword-armed men were going to be slaughtered on the flat ground. So, the general ordered an immediate withdrawal and ceded the plains to Perseus, moving for the foothills once again. Owing to the phenomenal discipline of the Roman legions, the retreat was carried out successfully, and Aemilius now had some breathing room to attack. Wheeling his horse to the right flank, he ordered the wing of 34 elephants to charge forward, with a mass of cavalry behind them. The Thracian and mercenary skirmishers immediately in the path of this charge were ideal troops for dealing with elephants, but they were exhausted and failed to concentrate enough missiles. The elephant vanguard caught them on a bad day, and they carved a bloody hole into Perseus's left wing. The cavalry then streamed around the elephants and mopped up those that were left, leaving the agama on the leftmost edge of the phalanx completely exposed. The victorious Roman right wing chased the retreating skirmishers, and then slowly began to reform slightly behind Perseus's line. Throughout this battle on the edge of the field, the phalanx had been pursuing the withdrawing legions into the foothills and onto rough ground. With the infantry screen already gone, the rightmost legionary unit swung inward and drove into the phalanx's vulnerable left. At the same time, gaps gradually began to open in the phalanx due to the increasingly uneven terrain. Aemilius took full advantage of this, riding up and down the line, shouting at his men to attack. Whether or not he was heard, the Roman centurions knew what they were doing and led their men into the now exposed arteries of the Macedonian phalanx. The pressure now began to mount. Fighting in unfavourable close-quarters combat and hit on the flank, the phalanx began to slowly fragment. Aemilius, who had retreated to a position of command on the heights, saw small streams of Antigonid troops fleeing from the rear of the infantry block. The coup de grace was delivered by the now regrouped Roman right flank. The elephants and cavalry now charged at the disintegrating army of Perseus and utterly routed it. Last to fall were the 3,000 elite Agama of Perseus. Not a single one of these valiant men fled, and they fought to the last man while their king fled on his horse. One of the greatest phalanxes ever had been crushed, and Alexander the Great's military legacy was finally buried. The legion would rule the field of battle from this point on. 20,000 of Perseus's troops were killed, and 11,000 more were captured, including Perseus himself. Amilius was given the title of Macedonicus by the Senate. The victorious general was voted a triumph and rode through Rome on his chariot. The treasures of Macedon and his victorious troops marched behind him. The Antigonid line, which descended from the revered one-eyed general of Alexander the Great, was extinguished, and the Macedonian kingdom was forever gone. Rome was victorious. We always have more stories to tell, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible. Now you can
75 years ago, in February 1945, a legendary battle proved the United States Marine Corps the greatest fighting force in human history. The Battle of Iwo Jima. American
had begun to admire Pyrrhus and his incredible The heroes and legends of the Iliad and the Odyssey inspired many great individuals throughout the ancient world, and these people played a great role in influencing history. Pyrrhus of Epirus was no exception. His adventures and conquests around Greece, Italy and Sicily during the early Hellenistic age gained him a reputation for martial prowess which was unmatched in history, and his benevolence to his people and soldiers ensured that he would be remembered fondly by his adversaries and friends alike, while his rashness would make him a lesson for others. In the aftermath of Alexander the Great's death in 323 BC, his empire fragmented and was fought over by his generals. His mother, Olympias, whose grandson now sat on the throne of Macedon, was threatened by the son of Antipater, Cassander. Olympias, being a Molossian herself, allied herself with King Aeacides of Epirus and marched with him to reconquer Macedon. However, by 317 BC, she had lost popular support due to her ruthlessness, and Cassander now decided to take advantage. He pushed north and invaded Macedon, gaining victory and having Olympias killed. In this triumph, a part of the Epirot army had rebelled against Aeacides and ousted him, declaring Neoptolemus II as king instead. Many of the deposed king's allies and family were killed, but his son, the 3-year-old Prince Pyrrhus, was spirited away towards Megara on the eastern border of Epirus. His family had sympathizers in the town, but he was not safe from Cassander. Because of this, the prince's guardians fled north into Illyria, where they took refuge in the court of Glaucius, king of the Illyrians, who pitied the young prince and took him in. He also possibly did this for several practical reasons, either because he decided a claimant to the Epirot throne was more valuable to him than Cassander's possibly empty promises, or because his wife was also a Molossian and convinced him to spare her kin. Not long after, Cassander invaded Illyria and defeated Pyrrhus's guardian in battle. He pledged to do no harm to the allies of Cassander in the region, but retained Pyrrhus at his court. In southern Greece, the forces of Antigonus I and Cassander were battling, which weakened the Macedonian king's control. The deposed Aeacides decided to take advantage of this weakness and marched back into Epirus, where he quickly gathered a large army. Cassander sent his brother Philip to deal with him, who quickly won 2 battles against and killed the Epirot king. Pyrrhus's father was dead, and the usurper Neoptolemus was back on the throne. After another round of fighting in Epirus and a peace between the Diadochi, Glaucius invaded Epirus in 307 BC, drove out Neoptolemus, and installed the 11-year-old Pyrrhus as king, whose kingdom was now essentially a client of the Illyrians. 6 years later, Pyrrhus travelled north to attend the wedding of Glaucius' son, but the Molossians once again revolted and overthrew Pyrrhus. Disgusted at his dependence on the Illyrians, they once again summoned Neoptolemus and placed him on the throne. This time Glaucius could not help Pyrrhus, and he instead withdrew to southern Greece and the court of Demetrius Poliorcetes, son of Antigonus I, who had married Pyrrhus' sister, Didomea. He then travelled with his new companion to Asia, where they rendezvoused with Antigonus. Under these two kings, Pyrrhus learned much in terms of generalship and siege warfare. Antigonus supposedly acknowledged his talents, stating that Pyrrhus would be the greatest general of his time if he lived long enough. This assertion would soon be tested for the first time. In 301 BC, the 80,000-strong forces of Lysimachus and Seleucus faced off against the 80,000-strong army of Antigonus and Demetrius at the Battle of Ipsus. At the age of 18, this was Pyrrhus' first experience of a major battle, and he would prove to be a competent fighter. As a young aristocrat, he likely fought in the cavalry alongside his brother-in-law Demetrius on the right flank. Sources do not give many details, but they say that though he was still a youth, he routed the enemy in front of him and was courageous in the melee. Nevertheless, the Antigonids lost the battle, and Pyrrhus managed to escape with Demetrius to Greece. Pyrrhus was then tasked with commanding the remaining Antigonid allies in Greece, while his superior travelled to Thrace in order to make war with Lysimachus. In 298, Demetrius made peace with Ptolemy I, who had solidified his position as the ruler of Egypt. As a part of the peace terms, Pyrrhus was sent to Egypt as a hostage, which was more of a position as an honoured guest than a prisoner in the ancient world. The new arrival impressed the court in Alexandria with his strength and prowess, both in hunting and during military exercises. His years in exile, both with the Illyrians and Demetrius, seem to have made him skillful at ingratiating himself with those he resided with. After a few months, Pyrrhus was permitted to marry Ptolemy's stepdaughter Antigone, tying him closer with the court in Egypt. In 297, Cassander died, and the Egyptian ruler provided Pyrrhus with soldiers and money so that he might reclaim his kingdom. He came to terms with Neoptolemus, and both decided to share royal power. Predictably, both kings immediately began plotting. After a conspiracy by Neoptolemus was uncovered, Pyrrhus invited him to dinner and assassinated his co-ruler, becoming the undisputed king of Epirus for decades to come. Like the other Hellenistic rulers, Pyrrhus would soon attempt to expand his kingdom at the expense of his neighbours, and he would use the Epirot army to do this. Thucydides describes the typical 5th century army of Epirus as a tribal levy, disorganized, brave when things were going their way, but quick to dishearten and flee at any setback. However, it is clear that Epirus was influenced by the reforms in the Macedonian army to its east. Their infantry fought in the close order Sarissa phalanx, and the cavalry fought with lances, similar to Alexander's companions. At the start of his reign, it is probable that this new modern army of Pyrrhus had a total of 20 to 25,000 troops, and was a match for almost any of his contemporaries. In the tumultuous struggle for the throne after the death of the former king, Pyrrhus was drawn into a civil war between Cassander's sons, the eldest Antipater and the youngest Alexander. Their mother, Thessalonike, favoured Alexander and split the kingdom between them. However, Antipater was not satisfied with this and killed their mother, seizing the whole of the country in 294 BC. In return for Stymphaea and Parauia in Macedon, and Ambracia, Acarnania and Amphilochia in Greece, Pyrrhus agreed to help Alexander. After securing these new territories with garrisons, he conquered the rest of Macedonia and handed it over to Alexander. Lysimachus, who had been petitioned by Antipater to help, advised the two kings to come to terms, and so they did, while Pyrrhus withdrew back to Epirus. This was not the end of it. Demetrius, who had been campaigning against the Spartans, now marched north, and eventually murdered Alexander after a feast. Then he assembled the Macedonian army and proclaimed that he was the rightful claimant to the throne, and that Cassander and his sons were the murderers of Alexander the Great's family, whereas his own house had followed Alexander's legacy and attempted to keep it alive. This won the Macedonians over, and they acclaimed him the new king. By the end of 294 BC, Demetrius controlled a powerful empire, consisting of the entirety of Greece with the exceptions of Sparta, Messenia and Pyrrhus's kingdom, with which he now shared a border. The former master and apprentice would be rivals for years to come. Meanwhile, Pyrrhus's wife Antigone died in childbirth, and he embarked on a series of political marriages which gained him the island of Corcyra. The Greek cities revolted against the Macedonian king twice in 293 BC. Encouraged by this, Pyrrhus invaded the western part of his neighbour's kingdom with around 30,000 troops and exacted tribute from a few cities. Responding almost immediately, Demetrius marched against Pyrrhus with a vastly superior army, and so he retreated into Epirus before the Macedonians could bring them to battle. Before leaving to besiege Thebes, Demetrius left an 11,000-strong garrison under his best general, Pantaucus. While he was back in Epirus, Pyrrhus's wife Lanassa, the daughter of Agathocles of Syracuse, deserted him and offered herself and Corcyra to Demetrius, stating that she could no longer bear sharing her home with Pyrrhus's other barbarian wives. Without any navy to oppose his former comrade, Pyrrhus sat back and allowed Demetrius to take both Corcyra and Leucas. This was just a prelude to his future plans. Being just as restless and ambitious as Pyrrhus, Demetrius now attacked Epirus's Aetolian allies in 289, neutralizing them and leaving Pantaucus to occupy them before marching into Epirus. He marched north through the mountain passes to invade Ambracia, while Pyrrhus, hearing of the invasion, quickly assembled a force to oppose Demetrius and marched south down the coastal road. However, as the two armies were now on different roads, they passed one another by. While the unopposed invader now plundered the Epirot countryside, Pyrrhus encountered the 10,000-strong Macedonian force of Pantaucus, which had been left to garrison Aetolia. The army of Epirus likely numbered around 20,000 soldiers and heavily outnumbered their enemy. It is probable that, due to the veteran nature of the soldiers, Pantaucus's reputation as Demetrius's most competent commander, and the mountainous terrain of Aetolia, the battle was evenly matched despite Pyrrhus's numerical advantage. The Macedonians held firm despite the heavy fighting. During this melee, the two commanders sought one another out, and Pantaucus challenged the Epirot king to individual combat. Pyrrhus, not being one to yield to anyone in daring and prowess, accepted this challenge. After first throwing their spears at one another, the two combatants duelled with swords. Pyrrhus was wounded at first, but then quickly gave Pantaucus 2 wounds in return, one on the thigh and then the deciding wound to the neck. Demetrius's general was then carried away by his bodyguards, and being inspired by their commander's victory, the Epirot phalanx cut their enemy to pieces, killed many in the pursuit, and captured 5,000 prisoners, whom Pyrrhus promptly released. This was Pyrrhus's first victory as a commander, and he had conducted himself in a brilliant manner, both in his generalship of the army and his personal courage in the duel. His army, jubilant with victory, now gave him the title Eagle, a moniker which would remain with Pyrrhus throughout his life and future conquests. The Epirot king, in an act of humility to his soldiers, stated, "Through you, I am an eagle, for how should I not be when I have your arms to sustain me?" In addition, the defeated Macedonians now had a high opinion of Pyrrhus and his skill in arms, a fact that would play a part in the wars to come. Demetrius's theft of his wife and the island of Corcyra embittered Pyrrhus, and when he discovered his foe was seriously ill in the wake of the Epirot victory over Pantaucus, he sent an invading army into Macedonia in late 289. He was initially only attempting to plunder the countryside, but without Demetrius to lead the defense, he met almost no resistance, reaching Agae before he was repelled. When Demetrius had recovered, he gathered a huge army and intended to reclaim his father's old Asiatic possessions, so made peace with Pyrrhus. Confronted by Demetrius's huge Macedonian army, the other kings, Ptolemy, Seleucus and Lysimachus, formed an alliance in order to cut their old Antigonid foe down to size for a second time. The alliance sent embassies and letters to Pyrrhus in Epirus, advising him of the best time to attack when Demetrius was occupied with the other kings. Pyrrhus may have been hesitant, but to remain neutral would have resulted in no gain. If Demetrius gained victory, he could overwhelm Epirus at any point, and if the allies won and Pyrrhus was not part of the alliance, he would reap none of the spoils. Most importantly, this might give him an opportunity to reconquer part of or all of Macedonia, and so he joined the alliance. In 288 BC, the coalition attacked. Ptolemy sailed from Egypt in the south to attack Demetrius with a huge fleet of ships, while Lysimachus thrust into Upper Macedonia from his lands in Thrace. In response, Demetrius moved northeast with his large army to confront Lysimachus, and at this point, Pyrrhus invaded from the south almost completely unopposed. Back to the north, Lysimachus was defeated in battle by Demetrius, but his army was angry that their commander had allowed Pyrrhus to plunder their lands, and unrest began to spread. After Demetrius marched against Pyrrhus himself, the Epirot king sent agents into the enemy camp to spread propaganda and create chaos. Small groups of Macedonians, who supposedly had begun to admire Pyrrhus and his increasingly favourable reputation, defected, followed by the entire army. Demetrius escaped to the coast. Though Pyrrhus had won a great victory and gained Macedonia for himself, Lysimachus now marched into the kingdom and proclaimed that the victory had been a joint effort. Pyrrhus, not confident in the loyalty of the fickle Macedonians, left the kingdom to Lysimachus and retreated to Epirus. Over the next few years, Demetrius I finally perished, and his holdings were inherited by his son, Antigonus Gonatus. Lysimachus attempted to isolate Pyrrhus, but in 282 he was attacked by Seleucus. At the Battle of Corupedium, Lysimachus was defeated and killed, while Seleucus was murdered shortly after. His murderer, Ptolemy the Thunderbolt, wasted no time after his treacherous act and was declared king by the Macedonian army. The only other claimant to the throne of Macedon was Pyrrhus, but he would soon decide on another course of action to the west. Meanwhile, on the Italian peninsula, the southward expansion of a new power, Rome, was threatening the independent Greek colonies in Magna Graecia. One of these cities, Tarentum, a colony built by the Spartans, was the most powerful, and had provoked the Romans by attacking their ships and humiliating their envoys. Now worried about Rome, the Tarentines, who governed democratically at this point, voted to send an embassy to Epirus asking for assistance in 281 BC. Pyrrhus agreed, but demanded that Tarentum must pay the costs of the war and give him supreme command of the allied forces. To further pressure his western rival into going to Italy so that he could concentrate on the east, Ptolemy the Thunderbolt of Macedon offered Pyrrhus 5,000 more phalangites for the campaign. In early 280 BC, Tarentum sent its fleet to transport Pyrrhus's army to Italy. The force which embarked in Epirus consisted of 20,000 men, mostly Macedonian and Epirot Sarissa pikemen, and possibly some mercenaries, 3,000 cavalry, 2,000 archers, 500 slingers, and 20 war elephants. After landing, the king began to militarize Tarentum and deal with any political enemies there, while the Romans did the same in the cities under their control. Preparing for the coming conflict, Consul Publius Valerius Levinus was given command of 4 legions and was ordered to march directly against Tarentum. They wanted to force Pyrrhus into battle before his Greek allies arrived, and raided the countryside while pushing south. In mid-280 BC, their plan succeeded, and, learning that the Romans were bearing down on the Greek city of Heraclea, Pyrrhus marched to meet his new foe for the first time. The invading Roman army consisted of 4 Roman and 4 allied legions, and was drawn up in the traditional manipular fashion. Young Hastati manned the front ranks, more experienced Principes filled in behind them, and veteran Triarii stood in reserve. In total, the Romans had around 40,000 legionnaires. In addition, 2,400 Roman and allied cavalry were placed on the wings. They were commanded by Consul Levinus. Meanwhile, Pyrrhus's initial force of 25,500 infantry had been supplemented by thousands of Magna Graecian infantry, mercenaries, and a few thousand cavalry. In total, the Greek army may have numbered around 31,000 infantry, including his 20,000 heavy phalangites and a few thousand local allies. 5,500 missile troops, including 1,000 Rhodian slingers and Thracian javelinmen, formed Pyrrhus's skirmishing force, while his 4,000 cavalry were drawn from the expert horsemen of Thessaly in Greece, who were famous for their ability to move in a diamond-shaped formation, and were armed with the Ziston, a 12-foot-long two-handed spear, and some light javelins, being able to harass or charge with equal skill. In reserve were the Epirot king's 20 war elephants. In contrast to the typically aggressive Roman plan, Pyrrhus wished to delay any battle for as long as possible until his allies could rally their forces and join him. Shadowing the larger Roman force, he encamped on a plain outside the city near the left bank of the Siris River, hoping to protect the settlement on terrain suitable for his phalanx, while his enemy encamped on the other side of the river a little further upstream. When his army was resting, Pyrrhus and his friend Megacles went scouting to examine the enemy camp. Surprised at the organized nature of the supposedly barbarian camp, the Epirot king stated forebodingly, "These don't look like barbarians to me. We'll see what they can do soon." In order to guard the riverbank, a contingent of light infantry missile troops was sent towards it. This done, Pyrrhus turned to other concerns, thinking he had plenty of time in his strong defensive position. He was about to receive a nasty shock. After a few hours of preparation, Levinus unexpectedly ordered the entire Roman army of over 40,000 legionnaires to cross the river. The small force of light infantry skirmishers that Pyrrhus had placed on the riverbank pelted the Roman vanguard with missiles and slowed them down a little, but the noise of an entire army crossing the river deafened them, and they were unable to hear what was coming. To their left, the Roman Equite cavalry, who had crossed the river further upstream, smashed into the flank of the defending missile units, who quickly retreated after suffering huge losses. The Roman velites were now coming across, and Pyrrhus, who could not afford to lose his river defense entirely before his infantry was ready, organized his phalanx before charging ahead of them with 3,000 of his best cavalry straight into the Roman light infantry vanguard. This slowed them down and gave the phalangites a chance to catch up. As they approached the battle line, the Roman Hastati crossed the river. They were better armed and armoured than the velites, who pulled back behind the line and instead engaged the cavalry on the wings. In this melee, Pyrrhus was knocked off his horse and almost killed by an enemy, which prompted him to pull back. His friend Megacles now swapped armour with Pyrrhus and donned the king's unusually magnificent armour, riding back into the fray. The Romans were now in trouble. Despite Lavinius's bold crossing of the river, the wall of pikes was now fixed and began to slowly push the doggedly determined Romans with their backs to the river. They fought with tenacity, but had not found a way to hit the phalanx in its flank or rear. Gradually, the Roman army began to melt away under the pressure of the phalanx, but then everything turned. Megacles, armoured in the king's panoply, was slain by a legionary, and the helmet was paraded around the battle line, inspiring the Romans and demoralizing the Epirates, who all believed that their king was dead. At this point, the phalanx slowly began to waver, and the Romans pushed them back from the riverbank. The real Pyrrhus, understanding that this was a key moment in the battle, charged up and down his line in an attempt to inform his troops that he was not dead, shoring up their morale. At the same time, the 20 war elephants, which had until now been kept in reserve, were unleashed and hit both of the Roman flanks. While their infantry held firm, even against these monsters most of them had never seen before, the cavalry horses panicked and bolted, retreating through their own infantry and splitting the legion's formation. Even the legions lost their grit and began to run, while Pyrrhus commanded his Thessalian cavalry to chase the routing enemy along the shore and into the shallows of the river. By the end of the battle, 7,000 Romans had been killed and 2,000 captured, while the Epirates had suffered 4,000 casualties, including many of their senior veteran officers. Though Pyrrhus had won his first major battle against Rome, it had been a difficult and grinding slogging match. He would soon learn that despite his own martial prowess, he had truly met his match. Rome, dismissing Pyrrhus's offers of surrender terms, began recruiting a new army, and the Epirate king began to patch up his own, ready for the next battle, which was soon to come. In the wake of the defeat at the Battle of Heraclea in 280 BC, Consul Laevinus returned to Rome. The Roman recruiting machine intensified greatly, quickly replenishing the heavy losses they had suffered in the previous battle. Meanwhile, Pyrrhus, who still did not yet understand the Roman mindset, sent his friend and advisor Cineas forward to Rome as an envoy with great gifts, which were probably meant as bribes. Pyrrhus himself marched north in the direction of Rome proper, and his army was swelled by the Italian Greeks and Italian allies of Rome, who now viewed him as a hero for defeating their subjugators. In a show of Roman honor, Cineas was sent away without achieving his goal of peace, but he had observed the frightening speed of the Roman levy system. Almost directly after this, a Roman named Fabricus arrived at Pyrrhus's court, with the aim of negotiating the release of the prisoners taken at Heraclea. Pyrrhus tries to bribe him to no avail, and then fails to impress him by frightening him with an elephant. Fabricus was also an extremely honourable but prickly man. When Pyrrhus's treacherous physician offered to poison the king for money, Fabricus instead informed Pyrrhus and stated that he would not dishonour Rome by defeating his enemy by treachery. Greatly admiring this paragon of a man, the Epirate king offered the Roman first place among his companions. Fabricus refused, stating that if he had accepted, the Epirates would soon wish he were king instead of Pyrrhus. After this witty remark, he departed back to Rome with the prisoners, who were released as a gesture of kindness. The Pyrrhic army then continued its northward march and attempted to take Capua. Laevinus, who had reached the city before them, prevented Pyrrhus from taking it, so the king pivoted south and attempted to seize Neapolis, and again was repelled. After his failure to take the cities in Campania, Pyrrhus marched on Rome via the Latin Road and stopped just 6 kilometers from the city. After Brennus's assault in 390 BC, the walls of Rome had been strengthened and the city was reported to be impregnable. A strong garrison held the city, and 2 other armies were approaching Pyrrhus swiftly, and so he decided to retreat south to Tarentum rather than besiege the city over winter. With the Romans refusing to make peace, the campaign would continue into 279. Since his victory at Heraclea, the Italian tribes had flocked to his banner. Samnites, Lucanians, Bruttians and Salentines all sent contingents to join Pyrrhus's army. This year, instead of attacking the enemy capital directly, he would campaign up the Adriatic coast in Apulia, hopefully inducing more of Rome's allies to change sides and securing his supply lines back to Epirus. In spring, he began his advance. Up until this point, the legions had been reluctant to confront Pyrrhus after their prior defeat at Heraclea, but having the important Apulian cities threatened, they were forced to, and marched south to meet the Pyrrhic army near the city of Asculum. Consuls Publius Decius Mus and Publius Sulpicius Severio commanded the double consular army that the Romans had brought, consisting of around 40,000 legionaries and 5,000 cavalry. In addition, they had learned from their previous defeat at the hands of Pyrrhus's elephants, and had constructed roughly 300 anti-elephant wagons, armed with iron tridents and manned by missile troops. Pyrrhus, meanwhile, had around 38,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, and 19 elephants. His Macedonian phalangites were ordered to the position of honour on the right wing. To their left were the mercenaries hired from Tarentum and Ambracia. Next to these troops were the Bruttians and Lucanians, Italian allies of the Pyrrhic army. In the centre of the line were the Thesprotians and Caunian tribes of Epirus. Even closer to the left were units of Greek mercenaries, and on the left wing of the infantry line were the Samnites, armed as hoplites. Pyrrhus's flanks were covered by his cavalry, with light troops and elephants behind each wing. Outside of the main battle line, Pyrrhus formed up with 2,000 of his elite guard as a mobile reserve, ready to move wherever they were needed. The Roman army had an excellent defensive position, anchored on the far side of a small and swiftly flowing river. Seeing this, and the uneven ground close to the river that his phalanx currently occupied, Pyrrhus retreated to flatter ground to the rear, and allowed the Romans to cross the river. When both sides were on the same side of the river, they made contact. The battle between the phalangites and legionaries in the centre was inconclusive, while the cavalry on both wings engaged one another. The Pyrrhic horsemen engaged in the Macedonian style, continuously wheeling and charging again, while the Romans reined their horses and fought like infantry. As the cavalry battle intensified, Pyrrhus called his elephants forward, but the Romans sent their wagons in as a response. While this slowed the elephants at first, the light infantry deployed with them killed the wagon crews or the oxen pulling them. Meanwhile in the centre, the Romans were getting the better of the phalangites on the bad terrain, until the Italian allies of Pyrrhus finally broke under the pressure. The king, sensing the danger, charged with his 2,000 elite cavalry reserve to plug the gap and managed to destroy the Roman front ranks in the area. At this point, 4,000 Roman allies, who had been trying to attack the Pyrrhic army from behind, managed to find and burn the Pyrrhic camp, which was visible to the armies in the field. The phalangites were demoralized by this loss and began to lose cohesion, being pushed back by the Romans. The situation looked critical, but at this moment the elephants and cavalry on the Pyrrhic wings finally managed to attack the Roman flank, which suffered heavy losses. Sensing another massacre, Rome's commanders withdrew in good order back to their camp. The battle had been another hard contest, but Pyrrhus had gained victory again, at the cost of 3,500 men, while the defeated Romans lost around 6,000. As his camp was destroyed, Pyrrhus lost a few hundred more men due to lack of shelter and provisions in the days after the battle. He surveyed the destruction and corpses all around him, and famously stated, "One more victory, and we are undone." This is the origin of the term Pyrrhic victory, triumphs so costly that they are just as bad as defeats, a term which we still use 2,300 years later. After the bloody battle at Asculum, Pyrrhus once again marched back to his base at Tarentum and began to recruit fresh soldiers in order to fill his depleted ranks. As he recovered, 2 embassies arrived, each with a unique opportunity for the Epirot king. One was from Macedon back across the Adriatic, where in 279 BC, Ptolemy the Thunderbolt marched out to meet a Gallic invasion and had been killed after falling from his horse. Macedon was in trouble and needed a king who was a proven warrior. The second envoy was from the Greek cities of Sicily, which were beset by enemies, including the Mamertine mercenaries and, more importantly, the extremely wealthy Carthaginians. Likely tempted by ambitions of invading Sicily as a springboard to conquering Carthage, Pyrrhus opted for the Sicilian option, horrifying his Tarentine allies. In late summer of 278, he departed Italy for Sicily with 8,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry, his ships managing to avoid the Carthaginian blockade of the island. Pyrrhus's force landed at the eastern coastal city of Tauromenium, where a local tyrant had already declared his allegiance to the Epirot king. From there he sailed south to Catana. The citizens welcomed him as a liberator, and the army received 3,000 reinforcements. At this point, he travelled with both his army over land and ships at sea towards Syracuse. The Carthaginian army, which was besieging the city, had no naval support and were caught off guard by Pyrrhus's advance, retreating soon after despite their numerical advantage. After his victory at Syracuse, Pyrrhus was able to gain possession of the 140-ship-strong fleet there, which gave him an advantage over the Carthaginian fleet around the island. Now he moved west and marched on Agrigentum, where the city's tyrant, Soristratus, was also allied to him. It was here that Pyrrhus wintered and gathered his troops together before advancing further west. At the beginning of 278, the Pyrrhic army set off once again. The next city, another Heraclea, had to be stormed, and it was a sign that things were going to get much more difficult as they passed the Halicus River into Carthaginian territory. Despite this, the next major cities to the west, Selinus and Segesta, came over to Pyrrhus without a fight. This would be the last walkover he would enjoy on Sicily. Meanwhile in Macedon, Demetrius' son Antigonus Gonatus stepped up and defeated an 18,000-strong Gallic army at Lysimachia by luring them into attacking his abandoned camp, gathering many treasures, and when they were laden with goods, trapping the Gallic force between his army and his fleet. After this, he took the kingship of Macedonia for himself. While Pyrrhus was now in the west, this was not the last time Antigonus would be heard from. Next, Pyrrhus decided to attack the mountain fortress city of Eryx on the northwest coast of the island. Pyrrhus laid siege to the settlement first with catapults and ballistae, and then with scaling ladders. The sources emphasize that Pyrrhus was first to climb the walls, and fought heroically, pushing many defenders back himself. After a hard-fought siege, the city was taken. To the northeast was Panomus, a port settlement which possessed the finest harbour in Sicily. Pyrrhus quickly stormed it after taking a few outlying fortresses, and then finally turned west once again to Lilybaeum. In his attempt to capture this final holdout of Carthage's power on Sicily, he had to raise intense taxes and levies on the cities that he now ruled. This new harsh conduct caused his Sicilian Greek subjects to view him as a tyrant, and he was no longer welcome. As this happened, Tarentum sent another envoy to their former ally. The Romans had reversed all the gains Pyrrhus had made. Seeing no future on Sicily, he marched back to the eastern city of Masena and sailed back to Italy. The city of Locri in southern Italy had a temple to the goddess Persephone and was well stocked with years of temple offerings. Always in need of funds, Pyrrhus robbed the temple and loaded the contents onto his ships, which were promptly destroyed in a storm. This misfortune had a great effect on the Epirot king, who considered himself cursed. After its retreat from Sicily, The Pyrrhic army finally arrived back to Tarentum in the spring of 275 BC, and Pyrrhus immediately began attempting to rebuild it. Finding troops was seemingly not a problem for the reputable commander, but finding more veteran troops to replace those he had lost in his previous battles was a more difficult matter. The core of the Pyrrhic phalanx were Greeks and the various Balkan tribes, who were in short supply in southern Italy. He had to make do with a weaker militia from Tarentum. Pyrrhus's reputation among the local tribes and Greek city-states had also suffered due to his previous abandonment of them, and so tribes such as the Samnites hardly supported him at all. Once rested and replenished, Pyrrhus and his army marched north to meet the legions for the third time. At that point there were 2 Roman armies in the field, and feeling confident he could defeat them in detail, Pyrrhus sent a small contingent of his army to Lucania in order to delay the second consular army's approach. He then took around 35,000 of his best remaining soldiers and the main portion of his army to attack the roughly 25,000 strong force of Manius Curius Dentatus, which had encamped on a hill near the town of Beneventum. Again, the Romans had chosen rugged terrain which would disrupt the Pyrrhic phalanx, and had an excellent defensive position. The Epirates could not hope to attack head-on, so Pyrrhus, possibly being influenced by the legendary final stand of the Spartans at Thermopylae, and needing a swift victory, sent 1/4 of the best troops and remaining elephants in his army on a deep flanking maneuver up a forested hillside at night, which would bring them up above and behind the Roman position. Meanwhile, the main force of the army would wait, formed up for battle on the plain below the legionary camp, waiting for the trumpets which would signal that the flanking force had made it. Pyrrhus's flanking contingent set off at dusk and travelled throughout the night, but they got lost in the dark and thickly forested woods, possibly due to the resentment of their Samnite guides, who, itching for revenge, led the Greek force astray. Contingents of soldiers began to wander off in the dark and become hopelessly lost, while others tried to find the path on their own. Confusion in this beleaguered group was total, and it was clear that there would be no coordinated night attack. Eventually, even their torches went out, and they were irreversibly lost. Back down on the plain, the soldiers in the main force were kept awake, becoming more and more tired. As the hours ticked by, it became clear to them that the trumpets would not be sounding that night. Dawn broke, and the Pyrrhic flanking force finally emerged fully visible on the heights behind the Romans, with their element of surprise completely gone. Nevertheless, trumpets sounded and the battle began. The Roman Velitae skirmishers charged forward and threw a storm of light javelins at the phalanx, which was already disordered by the terrain, and now began to fray under the pressure. As the Velitaes rushed between the Roman maniples in retreat, the Hastati now smashed into the tired and hungry Phalangites. Their final rain of Pila, as well as their frontal charge, began to disintegrate Pyrrhus's flanking force on the heights, and he hastily ordered his remaining elephants to charge at the Roman flanks. Unfortunately for him, the Romans had learned well, and shifted the Principes, in addition to the withdrawn Velitaes, to the wings, with many Pila at the ready, and they unleashed a withering hail of missiles against the elephants, which panicked and bolted, crushing many of their own tightly packed infantry as they did. Seeing that all was lost on the heights, Pyrrhus and a few hundred elite guards began to charge down the hill towards the remainder of his army and attempted to rally them, before positioning himself with the cavalry on the right flank. Turning away from Pyrrhus's now mauled flanking force, the triumphant Roman army began to charge downhill at the main body of the phalanx. As the Romans crashed into the Phalangites with immense momentum, the Pyrrhic left flank quickly caved and began to pull back, followed by the right flank. Again, the now desperate Epirate king attempted to save the situation by sending in his last remaining elephants, and again the Roman skirmishers and javelinmen scattered them. Finally, the battered and exhausted Pyrrhic soldiers could take no more, and Pyrrhus ordered an orderly retreat to prevent his entire army routing. This crushing defeat was the final straw, and Pyrrhus, whose treasury was completely empty, left a strong garrison in Tarentum before returning to his capital at Ambracia with 8,000 infantry and 500 cavalry. Despite his losses in Italy, Pyrrhus still burned with a limitless ambition and immediately began planning his next campaign. Whether because he wished to raise more funds or was angered at Antigonus for not supporting him in Italy, or because he wanted to become the king of Macedon, Pyrrhus attacked his eastern neighbour in 274 BC. The campaign began well, with the Epirates taking many border towns and even having 2,000 Macedonian phalangites defect to them. After a few weeks, Antigonus marched against the invaders and met Pyrrhus at a narrow gorge near the Aous River. Pyrrhus's veteran phalanx had the best of the initial fighting and drove the Macedonians back, while Antigonus's Galatian mercenary rearguard resisted for a short while, but were then cut to pieces and routed. This left the unengaged Antigonid elephants isolated, and their handlers surrendered both themselves and their animals to Pyrrhus. On the front line of the phalanx clash, the Macedonians were wavering, and the Epirate king decided on a bold course of action. He raised his right arm and called on the Macedonian officers by name to surrender to him. As they had on a number of earlier occasions, the fickle phalanx of Antigonus deserted en masse. The battle was over, and Antigonus fled with a few bodyguards to Thessalonica. Pyrrhus now followed up his victory by overrunning all of Thessaly and most of Upper Macedonia, while Antigonus managed to hang on to some of the coastal cities with his strong navy. Always the tactician and never the strategist, Pyrrhus failed to finish off Antigonus when he had the chance, and he would pay the price. A rejected Spartan royal candidate named Cleonymus appeared at the Epirate court and approached Pyrrhus, proposing a plan to overthrow the Spartan king Areus and place himself on the throne while the king was campaigning in Crete. The opportunity to place his own puppet on one of Sparta's thrones was too tempting, as it would allow the conquest of the remaining Antigonid strongholds in southern Greece. With 25,000 infantry, 2,000 cavalry and 24 elephants, Pyrrhus invaded the Peloponnese in 272 BC, crossing the Gulf of Corinth by sea, as the only land route into the area at the Isthmus of Corinth was occupied by Antigonid forces. The Pyrrhic army disembarked and then marched south towards Megalopolis in Arcadia, where he was met by the Spartan ambassador. Here Pyrrhus lied and professed that he simply wished to attack the forces of Antigonus and to liberate the Greek cities from his rule. He also claimed that he wished to send his sons to Sparta for a military education, and the Spartans believed him, proceeding to reduce their patrols. Pyrrhus then betrayed the Spartans and marched on their city through the friendly territory of Messenia. By keeping to the west of the Taygetos mountains, he concealed his movements from the Spartans and emerged to the south of Sparta, completely surprising them. Outside of the city, Pyrrhus's 27,000-strong force met Sparta's 15,000 and routed them. As he marched on the city, the Spartan council decided to send their women and children away to safety in Crete. However, when they learned of the decision, the Spartan women vigorously opposed it. One woman, known as Archidamia, came to the council with sword in hand, saying that she had no wish to live on if Sparta perished. Their resolve was strengthened by the courage that their women showed, and they began to construct defensive trenches and stone walls. As they did, however, their women came to them and told the soldiers to rest, as they would need all the strength they could get, and they themselves began to prepare the defenses. In the morning, Pyrrhus led a frontal attack on the Spartan trench, but was repelled. His son, Ptolemy, then led a force of 2,000 Galatian and Epirate infantry around the left side of the trench, but he was ambushed from the rear by 300 men following the Spartan prince Acritatus, and Ptolemy's soldiers were almost all killed, with only a small contingent managing to make it back to the Epirate line. Pyrrhus then attempted several more times to break the Spartan defences, but the trench held firm. The Spartan women continued to assist in the battle, digging further defences and carrying the wounded away to the rear. Nightfall eventually stopped the battle. Irritated at his failure, Pyrrhus retreated and marched on Argos to intervene in a dispute. However, during the withdrawal, his son Ptolemy was killed in a Spartan ambush and Pyrrhus descended into a black mood. Two politicians, Aristeus and Aristippus, were feuding in Argos. As Aristippus was an ally of Antigonus, it was only natural that Aristeus sought aid from Pyrrhus. As he arrived near the city, Pyrrhus saw that his rival Antigonus had already occupied the heights above the plain, and challenged him to come down onto the plain and fight for the kingdom. Antigonus, who was a much more cautious and less glory-seeking character than Pyrrhus, declined and retreated slightly from the city, as his army was much smaller than that of Pyrrhus. During the night, Pyrrhus's allies within Argos opened one of the gates into the city, and his Galatian mercenaries took possession of the marketplace along with his elephants. The Argives, who learned of the attack, sounded the alarm and rushed to take strongpoints in the city. In addition, they sent messages to Antigonus asking for help. He had not withdrawn far and quickly marched back to his position outside the city, sending a contingent inside in order to assist against Pyrrhus. At the same time, Spartan king Areus came with a force of 1,000 lightly armed Spartans and Cretans. The Argives, along with their new allies, attacked the Galatian mercenaries. However, as the night progressed, the darkness caused both sides to become confused, and so the fighting died down until morning. When the sun rose and illuminated the situation, Pyrrhus was concerned by the numbers of the enemy troops in the city and decided to retreat, but was worried by the narrowness of the gates. He sent a message to his son Helenus to tear down a part of the city wall to allow a quicker withdrawal, but the courier misheard the order due to the noise of fighting. Instead, he delivered an order to march to his father's assistance in the city, and his relief force clashed head-on with his father's retreating force. The largest of Helenus' elephants had also become trapped in the narrow gateway and blocked the retreat. The Epirot army inside the city now began to panic and flee in all directions as the Argives attacked, while Pyrrhus himself turned to his pursuers. One of them was a hastily enrolled, poor young man of the city. He managed to wound Pyrrhus slightly with a spear through his breastplate, but was set upon by the king and a duel began. This Argives' mother was said to be watching the battle from the rooftops, and seeing her son confronted by such a lethal foe, threw a roof tile at him in desperation, which knocked him off his horse. Pyrrhus of Epirus, the fiery figure who had battled Romans, Carthaginians, Macedonians and Spartans, was beheaded as he lay injured on the ground. The death of Pyrrhus caused his army to surrender, and in the aftermath, Macedonian hegemony was re-established over Greece. Pyrrhus would be one of the last vestiges of the Alexandrian spirit of a Greek warrior king. But there are always more stories to tell, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible.
This is not juggling. This is called misdirection. And no matter what level you are at magic, we got stuff here for you. Learning basic principles of magic is like learning chords on a guitar. Once you know a few simple principles,
The Gauls were one of Rome's oldest and most bitter enemies. They had sacked Rome and throughout the centuries fought alongside the Republic's most dangerous adversaries, including Pyrrhus and Hannibal. By the end of the 2nd century BC, southern Gaul was largely subdued. However, there was still tension in northern Gaul, particularly along the Rhine. These tensions would ultimately climax in the Gallic Wars, the conflict that would shape the future of Western Europe for centuries to come, giving rise to the Holy Roman Empire and modern-day France. The conflict that would forever etch the name Gaius Julius Caesar in the annals of history. But before we start our video, we would like to thank our sponsor, Wix. Wix is everything you need to create a beautiful personalized site, as it offers hundreds of templates and top-grade hosting for free, along with various unique apps that you can add to your site. We were able to build a professional new website for our channel through Wix's technologically advanced editor tool, and you can see it at kingsandgenerals.org. You can see our YouTube videos, get our social media feeds in one place to catch our fun social posts, and access our merchandise and contact us. Wix allows us to have another outlet to promote our content and serves as a platform to connect our subscribers. Support our channel and build your own site by clicking on the link in the description or by entering the URL wix.com/kingsandgenerals. Rome had been rocked by almost half a century of civil wars, and the Republic was in decline. Both Marius and Sulla had marched on Rome, highlighting the ineffectiveness of the system for maintaining a large empire, and the fact that the legionaries were more loyal to their generals than to the state. Following this chaotic period, three men had established an unofficial alliance to effectively control the Republic. This was the first triumvirate, consisting of the famous general Pompey the Great, the richest man in Rome, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. Caesar had been consul the year before in 59 BC, but his political campaigning had left him in debt and made him many enemies in Rome. He needed to make money fast and gain enough military success to keep his political adversaries at bay. When the time came for distributing provinces for Caesar to govern as proconsul, he was able to use his political allies to secure Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and Transalpine Gaul for an unprecedented 5 years. This put Caesar in control of 4 veteran legions, the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, all of whom had fought with Caesar before in Hispania and were loyal to him. They had a total of roughly 22,000 legionaries, plus auxiliaries. Caesar now had the men he needed. All he needed was an excuse for war. Fortunately for Caesar, a Celtic tribe, the Helvetii, was planning a migration into Gaul in 58 BC. Their leader, Oregtorix, had formed a confederation with a number of neighbouring tribes, the Tulingi, Latubrigi, Rauraki, and Boii, and now they numbered 368,000 men, women, and children. Oregtorix had even convinced them all to burn their homes in order to leave no option of failure. However, soon he was accused of being a tyrant and was forced to commit suicide. Command passed to Divico. Divico was determined to stick to the plan and began amassing supplies in order to start pouring into Gaul. To do this, they would either have to pass through the land of the Roman ally Aedui and the province of Transalpine Gaul, or take the longer route through the mountain passes in the north. The Romans had built up a healthy fear of migrating tribes following the Cimbrian War in 113 to 101 BC, and so Caesar, hearing of this, was only too willing to come to the rescue of the Aedui. He took the only available legion in the area and force-marched them up to Geneva, destroying the bridge on the Rhone that provided access into Transalpine Gaul. The Helvetii appealed to Caesar, asking for military access through Roman lands and promising they would not attack. Caesar played for time, pretending to consider this offer for almost 15 days. Using this time, his legion was able to construct a fortified embankment almost 5 meters high, stretching 20 miles along the riverbank. With the legion manning the embankment and now in a stronger position, Caesar denied the Helvetii access and refused to allow them to cross. Some of the Helvetii ignored this and attempted to cross nonetheless in small boats, but were prevented from doing so by the legionaries throwing javelins and shooting arrows into them. With the southern route thus blocked, the Helvetii decided to take the longer northern route through the mountains into Gaul. Leaving his top lieutenant, Labienus, in command, Caesar returned to Italy to levy a further 2 legions and to pull the other 3 veteran legions out of their winter quarters in Aquileia, bringing his total to approximately 33,000 legionaries plus auxiliaries. Despite Labienus being in a strong position to easily block the mountain pass, the Helvetii managed to push into Gallic territories and began ravaging the land. The Gauls pleaded with Caesar to intervene and chase the Helvetii out, and Caesar, yet again, was only too willing to help, marching his legions into the Gallic territories. The decision of Labienus to not hold the Helvetii in the mountains was likely an order received from Caesar. The Celts were now in open terrain, which better suited the Roman legions, and their pillaging of Gaul gave Caesar an excuse to intervene.
It's Boyo time at Boyo Tropical. Right now, get dinner for just $5.99. Enjoy.
Word reached Caesar that the Helvetii were currently attempting a crossing at the Arar River. They had been crossing in 4 large groups, using many rafts and boats, but due to the size of the horde and their lack of organization, the crossing had already taken them days, and one group was still yet to cross. Caesar took his legions and swiftly marched to the river. Quickly forming his legions into battle formation, Caesar fell upon the Celts waiting to cross. Caught unaware, unprepared, and encumbered by their baggage, the Helvetii did not even have enough time to form a proper battle line. The fighting was over quickly, with the whole stranded group being killed or fleeing into the nearby woods, whilst the other 3 groups could do nothing but watch helplessly from the other side of the river. The main Helvetii force began to move on, and not wanting to lose the initiative, Caesar quickly built a bridge across the river and moved all of his 6 legions across. The crossing that had taken the Celts 20 days had taken the Romans just 1. Caesar began tailing the Helvetii, waiting for the right time to strike. There were a few minor cavalry skirmishes, but nothing decisive. Caesar did once manage to find a battlefield that was advantageous, and even had Labienus in position behind the enemy. However, due to poor communication from his scouts, Caesar was forced to pull back from the battlefield. This caused a delay in Caesar's plan, and he was beginning to run low on rations. He decided to head for the nearby town of Bibracta to resupply his army before continuing the pursuit. As he began to march off, however, Divico gave chase, harassing the rear of the Roman army. Caesar sent his cavalry and light infantry to fight a delaying action in order to buy time to deploy his main force on a nearby hill. The 4 veteran legions formed 3 lines at the front, with the 2 newly levied legions along with the auxiliaries positioned further up the hill. These men were not tested in battle, and so were not expected to do any of the fighting. Instead, they were to guard the baggage and were spread thin across the hill to seemingly increase the size of Caesar's army. The Helvetii, numbering somewhere between 60 to 90,000 warriors, had successfully fought off the Roman cavalry and light infantry, forcing them to retreat. Now they had formed their infantry into a tightly packed shield wall and advanced on the Romans. The front 2 lines of legionaries opened the battle with a volley of javelins. These hampered the Helvetii by becoming stuck in their shields, forcing them to drop them and break into a looser formation. With the shield wall in disarray, the Roman front lines charged into melee. The fighting was intense and tough, but the Romans' discipline and experience gave them the edge. Slowly they began to get the upper hand, with the Helvetii being forced back to a nearby mountain. However, as the Romans pressed up the mountain, a portion of the Helvetii allies, composed of Boii and Tulingi, roughly 15,000 warriors, entered the battle. These men had been acting as a rearguard, protecting the camp, and now they fell on the Roman flank, threatening to encircle them. The Helvetii, bolstered by the arrival of their allies, began pushing back with renewed vigour. With the two front lines of legionaries already engaging the Helvetii on the mountain, Caesar committed his final line of veterans, which had been acting as a reserve. After hours of hard fighting, the Helvetii on the mountain were eventually broken and forced from the battle. However, the Boii and Tulingi fell back to the camp to make a last stand. Using their baggage wagons, they formed a makeshift rampart and continued the fight, hurling missiles down into the Roman ranks. This is where the fighting was the most difficult, as the Boii were famed warriors and fought desperately. Finally, after fighting long into the night, the third line was able to break into the camp, ending the battle. The battle had lasted almost 12 hours. Caesar had lost perhaps 5,000 men, whilst the Helvetii had lost around 40 to 60,000. Of the 368,000 people who began the migration, only 130,000 were now left. Caesar, with no cavalry to speak of, was not able to give chase immediately, and gave his men 3 days in order to recover from the battle before starting the pursuit. The Helvetii, seeing the Romans chasing them once more, surrendered completely and were forced to return to their homeland and made a vassal of Rome, acting as a buffer between Roman and Germanic lands. Caesar had achieved his aim of gaining a swift military victory, and for now he would be able to hold off his political enemies in Rome. Furthermore, the Romans had now shown themselves to be a powerful force in the Gallic theatre. After his victory, Caesar rested in Bibracte for a short time before moving on. Rumour had already reached him of a Germanic tribe that had crossed the Rhine and was terrorizing Gaul. The Gallic Wars were just starting, and in our future videos we will talk more about them, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible. Now you can also support us by buying our merchandise via the link in the description. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.
It's Mattress Firm's President's Day sale. For a limited time, save up to $500 on select Tempur-Pedic.
My brother Tim was paralyzed in an accident 42 years ago. They told us he wouldn't live 10 years. We told them they were wrong. He turned 60 this year.
The Crusades are some of the most iconic and divisive wars fought in human history, and the image of knights in shining armour had a lasting effect on generations of history enthusiasts. Yet, even among them, the Fourth Crusade is universally regarded as a failure, an example of the extent of human greed and the tragedy of loss. In this video, we will tell the story of this doomed venture and the repercussions that followed in its wake. This video is sponsored by ExpressVPN. We use ExpressVPN as it provides a quick and simple way to make your internet activity private. Take back your internet privacy today and find out how you can get 3 months free. Go to expressvpn.com/kingsandgenerals. In 1187, Jerusalem was conquered by Saladin. As a response, the Christian world initiated the Third Crusade, and although the Crusaders managed to retake Acre and Jaffa, Jerusalem remained a part of the Ayyubid realm, and the conflict ended in a truce. Resolve to retake Jerusalem was still strong. By 1198, Pope Innocent III had begun a call for a Fourth Crusade. An army consisting mainly of soldiers from France and the Holy Roman Empire was mustered through the charisma of the Italian Count Boniface of Montferrat. However, this army would still need ships to carry them across the Mediterranean, and thus the Crusaders turned to the strongest maritime power of the era, the Republic of Venice. The Doge, Enrico Dandolo, agreed to manufacture a fleet capable of transporting the Crusader army for the price of 85,000 silver marks. The plan was now as follows. The Crusaders would sail south from Venice and attack the center of the Muslim world, Egypt. After conquering the Ayyubid capital, they would then proceed to take Jerusalem by land. However, problems began when the Crusader army arrived in Venice in May of 1202. Out of an expected 33,500 soldiers, only 12,000 were present. This infuriated the Venetians, as they had incurred a great expense building a total of 50 war galleys and 450 transport ships for the Crusaders, who were now incapable of paying their debt. Dandolo refused to allow the Crusaders to leave his city before the debt was paid. The Crusaders managed to collect up to 50,000 marks, but by doing this they now risked starving. Not wanting their investment to have been a complete loss, the Doge Dandolo hatched a plan in order to use the Crusaders to serve the Venetian agenda. He proclaimed the debts would be wiped if they were to take the city of Zara in the name of Venice. Zara, located on the eastern Adriatic coast, was a Catholic city ruled by the Catholic King of Hungary. For an army endorsed by the Pope in Rome, attacking it was a problematic prospect. Knowing this, some of the Crusaders refused the Venetians' deal and headed home. But most of the army set sail across the Adriatic to fulfill the Doge's request. When Pope Innocent III heard of this deal, he immediately threatened the Crusaders with excommunication. Count Boniface hid this letter from the army and pushed on to Zara. When they reached the walls of the city, the peoples of Zara hung banners of crosses along the outer walls, professing their Catholic faith. Despite this, the Crusaders sieged, breached, and sacked the city, killing many. Furious at the disobeying of his orders, the Pope excommunicated all the Venetians and Crusaders involved in the sack. But the Crusade leaders once more hid this letter from the army, fearing it would cause panic and desertion. The Crusaders decided to winter in Zara and plan their next move come the spring. Meanwhile, Boniface of Montferrat had left the army and sailed to southern Bavaria to visit his cousin, King Philip of Swabia. Here he met an exiled prince of the Byzantine Empire, Alexius IV Angelos. It is here that we must take a brief pause and contextualize the situation in the Byzantine Empire. The Komnenian dynasty, which ruled between 1081 and 1180, managed to retake most of Anatolia from the Seljuks, but with the death of Manuel Komnenos in 1180, things had changed, and the new dynasty, the Angeloi, was weak and despotic. In 1185, Isaac II became the emperor, but he was highly corrupt, and in 1195 he had been blinded and usurped by his brother Alexius III. Emperor Alexius fared no better than his predecessor, and revealed himself to be just as corrupt. Meanwhile, the son of the deposed Emperor Isaac, Alexius IV, had fled to Swabia to avoid the wrath of his uncle. It is here our story rejoins the Fourth Crusade. The young prince saw an opportunity to use the Crusader army for his own means. He implored Boniface to lead the Crusaders to Constantinople and depose his uncle, Emperor Alexius III. In exchange, he offered to pay 200,000 silver marks, offered 10,000 Byzantine soldiers for the campaign into Egypt, and most importantly, swore that the Eastern Orthodox Church would be placed under the authority of the Pope in Rome. Many Crusaders were hesitant to accept, not wanting to attack yet another Christian city. The Venetians, never ones to turn down an opportunity to get rich, were fierce supporters of this plan. Doge Dandolo offered the Crusade leaders heavy bribes to convince them to sail to Constantinople. Thus the Latin army and the young pretender prince set sail for the capital of Eastern Christendom. On June 23, 1203, the Latin army came within sight of Constantinople. The Byzantines were aware of the impending arrival of the Crusaders. The city was defended by 15,000 soldiers, 5,000 of whom were Varangians, an elite imperial guard made up of Saxons and Norsemen.
At David's Bridal, we exist for magical moments. All of the once-in-a-lifetimes that are worth.
It did not take long for fighting to begin. The massive Crusader fleet crossed the Dardanelles Strait and laid siege to the suburbs outside of Constantinople proper. The Latin cavalrymen used the cleverly constructed Venetian horse transport ships, which carried the knights right onto the beach, allowing them to charge directly out onto the shore to meet their foes. The Crusaders were repulsed in brief skirmishes at Chalcedon and Chrysopolis, but won a beachfront entanglement outnumbered 80 to 500. Nothing conclusive was determined. The Latins now realized that in order to gain a foothold in the city, they would need to take Constantinople's famous harbour, the Golden Horn, which was protected by a massive chain that prevented any ships from entering. Thus the Crusader fleet sailed up the Bosphorus Strait. Emperor Alexius III had anticipated this and mustered a sizable defending force that waited on the shore north of the suburb of Galata. The Crusaders charged right out of their horse transports and barreled down upon the Byzantine defenders in a full cavalry charge. The Greeks scattered, retreating to the Tower of Galata, where they fortified themselves. Back and forth fighting continued for a while, with the Crusaders barraging the tower and being repulsed. Eventually they breached the walls and chased out the Byzantines. By taking the tower, the Crusaders were able to lift the chain and allow their fleet to sail into Constantinople's harbour mouth. From their new foothold, they boarded the young royal upon a Venetian barge and sailed up to the city walls, shouting out their good intentions, declaring themselves as restorers of the rightful Byzantine ruler. Instead, the sight of young Alexius IV brought out jeers from the local population, who hurled insults, rocks, and rotten fruit at the young pretender. This was a revelation, as Alexius IV had claimed that he still had substantial support. But the Crusaders were in too deep now to simply pack up and go home. The prelates within the Latin army insisted that they remained within their right in supporting their patron prince. The siege resumed in the coming days in the form of a two-pronged assault. The Venetian detachment sailed their ships down the city's seawall and launched an assault, while the Crusaders, led by Count Boniface, assaulted the land wall northwest of the city. Here the Varangians proved their worth. The Nordic warriors met the Crusaders outside the land wall and inflicted heavy casualties. With the land front handled, they made for the sea. By this point, Venetian soldiers had secured a section of the sea wall encompassing 25 towers. After fierce fighting, the Varangians routed the Venetians, who were forced back to their ships. The Venetians covered their retreat by lighting a wall of fire, which spread and devastated a large chunk of the city. It was at this point that the Byzantine Emperor finally sprung into full action. He rallied a host of 8,500 men and rode with them out of the gates of St. Romanus to finally meet the Crusader host head-on. Yet, this would end in anticlimax. Fear overcame the despotic Alexius III, and in his cowardice he launched a full retreat back into the city walls before there had even been a fight. This remarkably shameful display disgraced the emperor in the eyes of his people, and he quietly fled from the city, abandoning his post. The imperial court quickly deposed Alexius III and reinstalled the frail and blind Isaac II Angelos as emperor. This move alarmed the Latins, who could only hope to collect the payment offered to them under Alexius IV. As such, they demanded that the young prince be elevated to co-emperor alongside his decrepit father. The Byzantines, wary of any further damage to their city, accepted. Thus, the first siege of Constantinople was successful, and the Crusaders and Venetians accomplished their goal in restoring Alexius IV to the Roman throne. An uneasy status quo had developed between the people of Constantinople and the Crusaders. The Latins demanded that the young new emperor pay what was promised to them. 200,000 silver marks was a massive debt, and the fact that Alexius III had stolen a good chunk of the royal treasury when he fled the city did not help. As a result, the crown was forced to collect precious Byzantine and Roman icons many centuries old and melt them down to produce enough silver. This blemished the reputation of the new emperor in the eyes of his people and paid only half of the debt. Things quickly deteriorated, and the Greeks of the city became more and more resentful, not only towards the Crusaders, but all Latin peoples, including the minority that had lived in Constantinople for generations. A riot broke out, and the Greek populace looted and burned the homes of Italian residents, killing many civilians. In a retaliatory fervor, the Venetians rallied a rabble of soldiers and stormed through the walls, attacking a mosque in one of the city's Muslim communities, but were fought off by the Muslims and Greeks standing side by side. Once again, the Venetians set a fire to cover their retreat, burning yet another chunk of the city and leaving many homeless. It was becoming clear that Alexius IV would likely never pay the rest of his debt. When the Crusaders issued an ultimatum, the young emperor refused. At this point, Dandolo cried out, "Miserable youth! We dragged you out of the mire, and to the mire we shall return you!" During this period, a Byzantine courtier of the Ducas family, known as Mourtzouphlos, had been the main advocate for resistance against the Latins, and his popularity increased. In February of 1204, this shrewd politician declared that the Byzantine people were tired of the rule of the Latin sympathizer Alexius IV. The emperor was strangled to death, and Mourtzouphlos was publicly declared the new Roman emperor as Alexius V. This change in leadership prompted the Crusaders to call for a meeting under a banner of peace. The Latin demands were heavy. They expected Mourtzouphlos to pay them 5,000 pounds of gold for their departure, swear his fealty to Pope Innocent III, and restore Alexius IV to the throne. The Latins were unaware he was dead. Before the Byzantines could reply, a Frankish cavalry charge thundered down the docks, scattering the emperor and his guard. Some Crusaders trusted no deal made with the Greeks, and it was now abundantly clear that hostilities would continue. By the end of February, the Crusaders had fully resolved to complete a full conquest of Constantinople. The prelates of the crusade declared that the Greeks were heathens and traitors to Christ. It seemed Mourtzouphlos knew a full invasion was soon to come. He urgently tried to sway the Varangian Guard to his side. The Nordic mercenaries demanded more pay that the new emperor could not provide, and thus they abandoned the fight. Constantinople was left with almost no garrison. On April 12th, the attack began. Favourable winds carried the bulk of the Venetian fleet right up towards the Theodosian seawall. Once more from their ships, the Latins managed to seize a section of the fortifications in the northwest part of the city. They commandeered the Blackeneye Palace and used it as a base from which they would strike out at the rest of the city. In order to defend their position, the Crusaders lit a wall of fire around the Blackeneye district. This fire spread, destroying yet another chunk of the city. Mortzuflos tried to rally more defenders, but the people of Constantinople were now in a panic and in no shape to resist. Mortzuflos fled the city, and Constantinople was left defenseless. And thus, the sack of Constantinople began. The Crusaders began a spree of looting, raping and massacring that was near unprecedented. Hundreds of thousands would die, and countless priceless treasures were destroyed or stolen. Reactions in Western Europe to the sack were mixed. Many expressed shock and horror at the Crusaders' actions, including Pope Innocent III, yet many defended the sack, claiming that the Greeks were traitors to Christ. Following the sack of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire was partitioned among Western Latin powers and the rump Byzantine states. The largest was the Latin Empire, with Constantinople as its capital. Baldwin I, Count of Flanders and the most charismatic of the Crusaders, was chosen to rule as the Latin Emperor. The fracturing of the Byzantine Empire greatly weakened Christendom's hold on Asia Minor and the Aegean Sea. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible.
75 years ago, in February 1945, a legendary battle proved the
This video was sponsored by The Great Courses Plus. Go to thegreatcoursesplus.com today to start your free trial. The Ottoman Empire was the most powerful of its era and conquered many regions in a decisive fashion. However, their invasion of the Balkans was met with stiff resistance. The peoples of this region fought the intruders for almost 200 years and defied their rule long after that. The bloody Battle of Kosovo in 1389 exemplifies this struggle for independence. So, let's see how this battle came to be. The Seljuk invasion, followed by the Crusades, completely changed the balance of power in the Middle East. The biggest victim of these events was the Byzantine Empire. It had started to lose lands to the Seljuks in the 11th century. Then the Crusades, despite helping the empire in the very beginning, led to the sack of its capital, Constantinople, by the Latins. Anatolia was fractured beyond anything seen before. The ethnic and religious makeup of Asia Minor changed as more Turkic tribes moved in. As if it wasn't enough, the Mongol invasion of the Middle East started in the 13th century. In 1241 they made their first foray into Anatolia, and in 1243 decisively defeated armies of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum near modern-day Sivas. The Sultanate became a vassal of the Mongols, and a Byzantine successor state, the Empire of Nicaea, used that respite effectively. By 1261, the Greeks took back Constantinople and restored the Byzantine Empire in the northwestern part of Anatolia and central Balkans. Unfortunately for them, the Mongols pushed more Turkic tribes out of Central Asia and the Iranian plateau towards Anatolia. By 1299, the leader of one of these tribes, Osman, was granted a small piece of land along the Byzantine border for his military service to the Seljuks. In 1302, he defeated a Byzantine army near Nicaea. Then, Osman used the dissolution of the Sultanate in 1308 to gain independence. Unlike other Beylik leaders, he didn't care for the usual tribal infighting. Osman and his descendants practiced a version of Islam that was stricter than that of the Seljuks and saw glory only in fighting against non-Muslims. His son Orhan took the Byzantine city of Prusa, the modern-day Bursa, and moved his capital there. Nicaea and Nicomedia fell to his troops in 1331 and 1337, and a few successful raids into Byzantine lands in Europe were conducted. Osmans, or Ottomans as they were called by the Christians, took their first city in Europe in 1354, using the fact that the walls of Gallipoli were destroyed by an earthquake. In the next decade, Adrianople, Plovdiv and Komotini were all conquered, and the new leader Murad I moved the Ottoman capital to Adrianople, modern-day Edirne. It seemed that nothing could stop the Ottomans, but to the west of their new holdings, the mighty Serbian Empire was ready to defend itself. In 1371, King Vukasin attempted to use the fact that most of the Ottoman forces were in Asia to take Adrianople and drive them out of Europe. With around 35,000 troops under his command, he moved to the valley of the Maritsa River. As no significant enemy force was in the area, the Serbian king did not send any scouts ahead, and his camp was virtually unguarded. But a small Ottoman army of 1,000 or so riders attacked the camp during the night. Thousands of Serbs were killed in their sleep, and even more drowned in the Maritsa during the chaos. The king, his brothers and many aristocrats died in this battle, which destroyed the Serbian Empire. Almost all Serbian and Bulgarian aristocrats became the vassals of Murad, among them the Prince of Moravian Serbia, Lazar. Despite that, when most of the Ottoman army moved to central Anatolia, Lazar rebelled alongside many other local feudal lords. His troops defeated a small army at the Battle of Plochnik in 1386 and pushed the Ottomans out of southern Serbia. This victory increased Lazar's authority tenfold, and he managed to form a broad alliance consisting of Serbs, Bulgars, Bosnians and Albans. Even some Bohemian and Hungarian aristocrats joined his army. But this time around he would be facing the best the Ottomans could offer. Sultan Murad, alongside his sons Bayezid and Yakub, moved towards Pristina in the June of 1389. Lazar and his troops would be waiting for them on the Kosovo, the Fields of the Blackbirds in Serbian. Let's take this opportunity to talk about the composition of the opposing forces. Murad had continued in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, expanding his regular army, which meant that Ottoman troops were very different from those once fielded by the Seljuks. Still, the Sultan did have a significant number of light cavalry, called Akinci. They were armed with composite bows, axes and maces, and usually acted as raiders or a flanking force. The regular cavalry, called Sipahi, were a somewhat heavier horsemen with lances and bows. The irregular infantry was represented by Azabs, who carried bows, polearms or halberds. Ottoman sultans also started a practice of using personal slaves from Christian peoples to form their elite Janissary troops. They also were armed with various weapons. Janissaries served as the Sultan's guard and had both cavalry and infantry units. The Ottomans also had early cannons in their service. Altogether, Murad had 50,000 troops in this battle. On the other hand, the Serbs had a truly European army. Most of their cavalry was heavy, with only a handful of light hussars in support. Serb infantry used both bows and melee weapons according to the situation. Lazar had brought 30,000 warriors with him. Mountains surround the field of Kosovo to the west and east. Lazar knew that he would not be able to contain the Ottomans in the open plains to the north, and hoped that the terrain would prevent his enemies from using their superior numbers. The prince commanded the centre with 15,000 troops, with cavalry in the first line and infantry in the second. The left was led by Vlatko Vukovic, while the right was under the command of a local aristocrat, Vuk Brankovic. Both had around 7,000 warriors. On the opposite side, the Sultan stayed in the centre with 20,000 of his regular troops, while Yakub commanded 15,000 Anatolian warriors on the left, and Bayezid was on the right with the same numbers again. The Ottoman front line consisted of archers, who had dug a small protective trench and reinforced it with stakes. Most of the artillery was in the centre for both armies. The battle began on the morning of June 15th with a volley from the Serb cannons, which failed to reach Ottoman lines due to the distance. Ottoman cannons also weren't effective, and their archers were ordered forward. Lazar responded by ordering his cavalry forward, but this attack was stopped by the Ottoman centre and right flank. The Serb cavalry suffered many casualties, but on the right the attack was successful. The Serbs pushed the enemy all the way back to their camp. However, Bayezid on the Ottoman right was also pushing back the Serbian left after some initial difficulty. Still, Lazar had the initiative and Murad was close to panic. This moment of the battle is still hotly debated in the Balkans. Leader of the right flank of the Christian army, Vuk Brankovic, left the field with most of the troops under his command. Some say that he was a traitor and had an arrangement with the Ottomans to abandon the battle. Others claim that he saved the troops that allowed him to resist the Ottoman onslaught for 2 more decades. Naturally, that freed up the Ottoman left, which pushed forward and attacked the Serb centre from the flank. The Serbian left slowly retreated under overwhelming enemy pressure, and soon their whole army was surrounded. We don't have all the details, but 2 events happened simultaneously at this point in the battle. First, Murad sent the majority of his troops forward to finish off the enemy, leaving himself nearly undefended. Then, a group of Serb knights used that weakness to break the line of his bodyguards and assassinate the Sultan. Christian sources assert that 11 knights sacrificed themselves to allow their comrade, Milos Obilic, to strike the enemy leader, who was killed on the spot. On another side of the battlefield, Lazar died fighting. Both Lazar and Milos are venerated as saints by the Serbian Church. After the death of the prince, the fight was over and turned into a bloodbath. Ultimately, the casualties on both sides were catastrophic, but still, the Ottoman invasion of Europe continued, and many battles that we are planning to cover in the future were fought. While creating this documentary, we used the series of lectures on the Ottoman Empire by Professor Kenneth W. Hull, provided by the sponsor of this video, The Great Courses Plus. This beautifully crafted 36-part series covers the whole history of the Ottoman Empire in great detail.